Rain pounds the cracked pavement as Sarah Collins stumbles through the empty streets of Cedar Falls, her thin dress soaked through, mascara streaking down her bruised cheek. The rumble of a Harley-Davidson cuts through the storm, its single headlight piercing the darkness like a predator's eye. She presses against a brick wall, trembling as the motorcycle approaches. The rider is everything nightmares are made of. Leather jacket stretched across broad shoulders, silver chains catching the streetlight, face hidden beneath a black helmet. When he cuts the engine and steps off the bike, Sarah's voice breaks through chattering teeth. "Please don't hurt me." But instead of advancing, the biker slowly removes his helmet, revealing weathered features and gentle eyes. Without a word, he shrugs off his jacket and extends it toward her shaking form. What happens when society's most feared becomes someone's unexpected savior? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The leather jacket weighs heavy on Sarah's shoulders, carrying the scent of motor oil and something indefinable that speaks of open roads and freedom. She clutches it around herself like armor while studying the man who offered it. He stands several feet away, giving her space, his dark hair damp from the rain. Marcus Steele has spent 45 years learning to read people, and this woman carries the unmistakable marks of someone who has been hunted. The way she keeps her back to the wall, how her eyes dart toward escape routes, the careful way she holds herself as if expecting another blow. He recognizes the signs because he's worn them himself. The dog tags beneath his leather vest press against his chest with each breath. Twin pieces of metal that remind him of brothers lost in Afghanistan, and the weight of survival when others didn't make it home. The Marine in him wants to eliminate the threat that put fear in her eyes. The man he's become knows that sometimes protection means patience. "There's a diner about 6 blocks from here," Marcus says, his voice carefully modulated to avoid any hint of aggression. "Betty keeps it open all night. You can get warm, maybe some coffee." Sarah's fingers trace the torn skin around her wedding ring finger, where she finally found the courage to remove the symbol of her imprisonment. The thin gold band sits heavy in her dress pocket, a reminder of David Collins and the life she's fleeing. 8 years of marriage that started with flowers and apologies and ended with fists and threats. 8 years of walking on eggshells, of making herself smaller and quieter until she nearly disappeared entirely. "I don't have money for coffee," she whispers. The admission burning her throat, Marcus tilts his head slightly, studying her with eyes that have seen too much violence and recognize its aftermath. Betty doesn't charge people who need help. She's got a soft spot for strays and wounded birds. The comparison stings because it's accurate. Sarah has been both for longer than she cares to remember, but there's something in this stranger's tone that suggests he might understand what it means to be lost. "Why are you helping me?" The question emerges before she can stop it. Marcus considers this, rain dripping from his hair onto the collar of his black t-shirt. The answer is complicated, rooted in sleepless nights and the faces of people he couldn't save. In the way his sister Rosa looks at him with worry that he's lost himself entirely to the darkness he brought back from overseas. In the knowledge that redemption sometimes comes disguised as the opportunity to do better this time. "Because someone should," he says finally. The simplicity of the response catches Sarah off guard. She spent years with David's complex manipulations, his elaborate explanations for why his actions were always her fault, why she deserved whatever punishment he deemed appropriate. The straightforward honesty feels foreign. Marcus gestures toward his motorcycle, a pristine Harley that gleams even in the dim streetlight. "I can give you a ride to Betty's or you can walk. Your choice. But staying out in this storm isn't going to help anybody." Sarah eyes the motorcycle with deep suspicion. David had always forbidden her from riding anything more dangerous than the passenger seat of his luxury sedan, controlling even her method of transportation. The idea of climbing onto something so powerful, so uncontrolled, terrifies her almost as much as the thought of David finding her. "I've never been on a motorcycle," she admits. First time for everything, Marcus replies. But he doesn't push. He simply stands in the rain, water running down his face, waiting for her decision. The Iron Hawks Motorcycle Club patch on his vest depicts a fierce bird with wings spread wide, talons extended. Sarah knows she should be afraid of what that symbol represents, of the violence and lawlessness that respectable people associate with motorcycle clubs. But this man removed his jacket for a stranger in the rain, and David Collins wore expensive suits while breaking her ribs. Maybe it's time to stop judging by appearances. Sarah takes a tentative step toward the motorcycle. Marcus's jacket still wrapped around her shoulders like borrowed courage. Will you drive slowly? Marcus nods, already moving to retrieve a spare helmet from his saddlebag. As slow as you need. The motorcycle purrs beneath them as they pull up to Betty's diner, its neon sign flickering pink and blue against the rain-streaked windows. Sarah's legs shake as she climbs off the bike, whether from cold or adrenaline she can't tell. The ride had been terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure, her arms wrapped around Marcus's solid frame. As the world rushed past in a blur of streetlights and possibility, Betty. Rodriguez emerges from behind the counter before the door's chime finishes announcing their arrival. She's built like someone who has spent decades on her feet. Silver hair pulled back in a practical bun, wearing an apron that declares "World's Best Grandma" in faded letters. But it's her eyes that catch Sarah's attention, warm brown and knowing, the kind that have seen everything and judged nothing. The diner itself feels like stepping back in time. Red vinyl booths line the windows, their surfaces cracked with age and stories. Black and white checkered linoleum shows wear patterns from 40 years of work boots and high heels. A jukebox in the corner plays Patsy Cline softly, her voice mixing with the sound of coffee percolating and bacon sizzling on the griddle. Marcus Steele. "What are you doing dragging people out in weather like this?" Betty scolds, but her tone carries affection rather than genuine anger. She moves towards Sarah with the purposeful stride of someone accustomed to taking care of others. "Found her walking in the rain," Marcus replies simply, settling into a booth near the back, where he can keep an eye on both the door and the windows. Old habits from overseas, where situational awareness meant the difference between coming home and coming home in a box. Betty's practiced eye takes in Sarah's appearance. The soaked dress, the bruised cheek, the way she holds herself like something broken trying to stay upright. Behind the counter, a family photograph shows Betty, surrounded by children and grandchildren of various ages, all smiling broadly at someone who clearly knows how to love unconditionally. "Honey, you look like you could use some coffee and food." "In that order," Betty says, her voice gentle but brooking no argument. "Coffee's always free for people having a rough night. And I've got fresh pie that's just going to go to waste if nobody eats it." Sarah opens her mouth to protest, to explain that she can't pay, but Betty waves her off with flour-dusted hands. "Don't even think about it. This place has been feeding people who need feeding for longer than you've been alive. Now what kind of pie sounds good?" "I've got apple, cherry, and chocolate silk." The kindness in Betty's voice nearly undoes Sarah completely. It's been so long since someone offered her something without expecting payment or penance in return. David's version of generosity always came with strings attached. Gifts that became weapons during arguments. Kindnesses that transformed into evidence of her ingratitude. "Apple sounds wonderful," Sarah manages. Sliding into the booth across from Marcus, Betty bustles away, returning quickly with 2 cups of coffee and enormous slices of pie that smell like cinnamon and home. The coffee is strong and hot, warming Sarah from the inside out, while the pie tastes like comfort itself. "You make this yourself?" Sarah asks between bites. "Every day," Betty confirms, settling into the booth beside her with her own cup of coffee. "My grandmother's recipe. She always said food made with love tastes different than food made for profit." Marcus sits quietly, occasionally glancing toward the windows, but otherwise letting the women talk. He understands instinctively that Sarah needs this, the gentle normality of conversation with someone who isn't trying to save her or hurt her, just offering simple human kindness. "Are you from around here?" Betty asks, though her tone suggests she already knows the answer. "No," Sarah replies, then stops, unsure how much to reveal. The truth feels too large and dangerous to share with this kind stranger. "Well, you're here now," Betty says simply. "That's what matters. Sometimes we end up exactly where we need to be, even when we don't know it at the time." Sarah glances at Marcus, who's focused on his coffee but listening to every word. His presence feels protective rather than threatening, a solid anchor in the storm of her upended life. "Can I ask you something?" Sarah says to Betty. "Course, honey. Aren't you afraid of him?" Sarah gestures toward Marcus and his leather vest with its Iron Hawk's patch. Betty follows her gaze and laughs, the sound rich and genuine. "Marcus? Honey, that boy has been coming in here for 3 years, and the worst thing he's ever done is leave too big a tip. Don't let the leather fool you. Sometimes the scariest-looking packages hold the gentlest hearts." Sarah wakes to the sound of coffee brewing and sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows. For a moment, panic grips her chest until she remembers. Betty's diner, the small apartment upstairs, the motorcycle ride through the rain. She's wearing clothes that Betty provided, soft cotton pajamas that smell like lavender fabric softener instead of the expensive cologne David always insisted she wear. The bruises on her arms have deepened overnight, purple and yellow fingerprints that map the geography of her final argument with David. She traces them gently, remembering how Marcus's eyes had darkened when he'd noticed them last night, his jaw tightening with controlled anger that somehow didn't frighten her. Downstairs, she finds Marcus sitting at the counter with a cup of coffee and a sketch pad, his large hands moving with surprising delicacy across the paper. He's drawn the diner's interior with careful attention to detail, the way morning light falls across the checkerboard floor, the gentle curve of Betty's smile as she flips pancakes, the worn comfort of the vinyl booths. "You're an artist," Sarah says, settling onto the stool beside him. Marcus's hand stills on the paper. "Just something I do to keep my hands busy, but Sarah can see it's more than that." The sketches show a sensitivity that contradicts everything she thought she knew about motorcycle club members. There's tenderness in the way he's captured Betty's expression, understanding in the careful shading that brings the diner to life on paper. "These are beautiful," she says softly. Marcus closes the pad abruptly, as if embarrassed to be caught revealing something so personal. "Betty's got your breakfast ready. Says you need to eat more than pie if you're going to get your strength back." Sarah accepts the plate of scrambled eggs and toast, noticing how Marcus positions himself between her and the front window without being obvious about it. The gesture speaks of military training and ingrained protective instincts. "Can I ask what happened to you?" Marcus says quietly, nodding toward her bruised arms, the question she's been dreading. Sarah's fingers find the pocket where her wedding ring still sits, a circle of gold that once symbolized love but became a shackle. "My husband," she says simply. "Ex-husband, I suppose, now that I've left." Marcus's knuckles whiten around his coffee cup. "How long?" 8 years. It wasn't always bad. In the beginning, he was charming, attentive, said he loved me so much he couldn't bear to share me with anyone else. I thought it was romantic when he didn't want me working, when he preferred us to stay home together instead of going out with friends. The words come slowly, like blood from a wound that's finally been opened. Sarah has never spoken about this to anyone, never had anyone who might understand. "But it got worse," Marcus says. "It's not a question. Gradually. So slowly I didn't notice at first. A raised voice here, a grab that left marks there. He'd apologize after, bring flowers, tell me he loved me too much, and that's why he got jealous. I believed him for longer than I should have. Marcus's own scars run deeper than the visible ones Sarah can see on his hands and forearms. Afghanistan had taught him about violence, about the way it spreads like infection if left untreated. He'd seen what men could do to each other in the name of power and control. What changed? He asks, Sarah's hand moves unconsciously to her ribs, where the final beating had left her gasping and broken on their kitchen floor. He said he was going to kill me, not in anger this time, but calm, matter of fact, like he was discussing the weather. That's when I knew he meant it. The diner falls quiet, except for the soft sounds of Betty moving in the kitchen, giving them privacy for this conversation. Marcus understands the weight of Sarah's admission, the courage it took to finally run. "Where will you go?" he asks. Sarah stares into her coffee, seeing no clear path forward. "I don't know. I have some money saved, hidden where he couldn't find it, but not much. I need to disappear completely, start over somewhere he'll never think to look." Marcus studies her face, seeing the fear beneath her determination. He thinks of his sister Rosa, who would know exactly what Sarah needs to hear. He thinks of the brotherhood he found in the Iron Hawks, people who understood that sometimes your chosen family matters more than the one you were born into. "You don't have to disappear," he says finally. "Sometimes the best place to hide is right in plain sight, surrounded by people who'll stand between you and whatever's hunting you." Sarah meets his eyes, searching for false promises or hidden agendas. Instead, she finds steady certainty in something else, the recognition of one survivor extending a hand to another. The Ironhawks clubhouse sits on the outskirts of Cedar, falls like a fortress built from chrome and leather dreams. Sarah's hands shake as Marcus guides his motorcycle into the parking lot, surrounded by a dozen other bikes that gleam like metallic predators in the afternoon sun. The building itself is unremarkable, a converted garage with reinforced windows and the club's charter hanging proudly in a frame by the front door. The charter photograph shows 12 men in leather vests, arms crossed, faces serious with the weight of brotherhood and shared purpose. But what strikes Sarah most is how ordinary they look beneath the intimidating facade. A mechanic with grease under his fingernails, a construction worker with calloused hands, a teacher whose gentle eyes contradict his fierce expression. "They're going to stare," Marcus warns as he cuts the engine. "Most of them have never seen me bring anyone here before." Jake Bulldog Morrison emerges from the clubhouse before they can knock, his massive frame filling the doorway. He's built like someone who has spent decades moving heavy objects and dealing with people who don't want to be moved. His beard is streaked with silver, his arms covered in tattoos that tell stories Sarah can't begin to decipher. "Well, well," Jake says, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Marcus brings home a stray. That's a first. Sarah bristles at being called a stray, but Marcus's hand on her shoulder keeps her steady. "Jake, this is Sarah. She needs help," Marcus says simply. "What kind of help?" Jake's eyes narrow, assessing Sarah with the calculating gaze of someone who has learned to identify trouble before it arrives. "The kind that involves keeping her ex-husband from finishing what he started," Marcus replies. And something in his tone makes Jake's expression soften. The interior of the clubhouse defies Sarah's expectations. Yes, there are motorcycle parts scattered on workbenches and leather jackets hanging on hooks. But there are also family photographs on the walls, a well-stocked kitchen, and comfortable couches that suggest this is more home than headquarters. Rosa Steele appears from behind the bar, wiping her hands on a shop rag. Marcus's sister shares his dark hair and steady eyes, but where he carries the weight of military service, she radiates the competent confidence of someone who can fix anything mechanical and isn't afraid to get her hands dirty in the process. "So you're the reason my brother's been acting like a human being instead of a ghost," Rosa says, extending a hand to Sarah. Her grip is firm, honest, the handshake of someone who judges people by their actions rather than their circumstances. "I don't want to cause trouble," Sarah begins. But Rosa waves her off. "Honey, trouble finds us whether we want it or not. The question is whether you're the kind of trouble worth having." Other club members begin filtering in as word spreads that Marcus has brought someone home. There's Tommy Wrench Martinez, whose gentle manner with the clubhouse's rescued dog contradicts his intimidating nickname. Maria Spike Gonzalez, the club's treasurer, who runs a successful accounting business when she's not riding. With the Ironhawks, each introduction challenges another one of Sarah's preconceptions about what motorcycle club members should be. We're not the monsters the newspapers make us out to be, Jake explains, as they settle around a large wooden table scarred by years of meetings and meals shared. Most of us are just people who needed a family and found one in each other. Sarah studies the faces around the table, seeing the same recognition in their eyes that she'd found in Marcus's. These are people who understand what it means to be discarded by polite society, who have built their own community based on loyalty and mutual protection, rather than social status or respectability. My ex-husband is a respected businessman, Sarah says quietly. He has connections, influence. People believe him when he talks. People believe what makes them comfortable, Rosa replies. They want to think that monsters look like monsters, that bad people wear their evil on the outside, where it's easy to identify. The truth is messier than that, Jake nods slowly. We've all been judged by our appearance, dismissed because we don't fit into neat little boxes. But that also means we recognize the real threats when they come disguised in expensive suits and charming smiles. Marcus reaches across the table and covers Sarah's hand with his own. Nobody hurts you again. That's a promise. The words carry the weight of collective agreement as every head around the table nods. Sarah feels something she hasn't experienced in years. The certainty that she's not alone, that she's found people who will stand between her and the darkness that has been hunting her. For the first time since leaving David, Sarah allows herself to believe she might actually be safe. David Collins stares at the empty closet where Sarah's clothes used to hang. His perfectly manicured hands clenched into fists that tremble with barely contained rage. The cell phone in his other hand shows her location as unavailable. The first time in 8 years that he can't track her exact position. The device had been his leash, his way of knowing where she was, every moment of every day, ensuring she could never truly escape his control. His reflection in the bedroom mirror shows a man that others find impressive. Tall, distinguished, with silver at his temples that suggests wisdom and success. The expensive suit fits perfectly across his athletic frame. The Rolex on his wrist catches the light just so. David has spent years cultivating this image of respectability. The successful businessman who could charm clients and intimidate competitors with equal ease. But beneath the polished exterior lurks something darker. Something that has been growing hungrier with each year of marriage. Sarah had been so young when they met, so eager to please, so easy to mold into the perfect wife. He'd enjoyed the process of breaking her spirit gradually, methodically, turning a vibrant woman into a shadow that existed solely for his pleasure and convenience. The kitchen still smells like the dinner she'd prepared before running. Pot roast with vegetables. His favorite meal, made exactly the way he'd taught her through years of criticism and correction. The untouched plate sits on the counter, a monument to her sudden rebellion that makes his jaw clench with fury. David opens his laptop and begins making calls. Starting with the private investigator he keeps on retainer for sensitive business matters. Richard Blackstone is the kind of man who asks no questions and leaves no trails. Perfect for situations that require discretion and results. She's run off, David explains, his voice carefully modulated to suggest wounded bewilderment rather than rage. I'm worried sick. She's been having some psychological problems lately, not thinking clearly. I need you to find her before she hurts herself. Blackstone's gravelly voice carries professional sympathy. Any idea where she might have gone? Family, friends, somewhere that holds special meaning? No family to speak of. I'm all she has. As for friends, David pauses, remembering how methodically he'd isolated Sarah from anyone who might have offered her support or alternative perspectives. She doesn't really have any close relationships outside our marriage. That's part of what worries me. The lie comes easily because David has practiced it for years. The concerned husband, whose wife's mental instability explains away any inconsistencies in their perfect marriage. He's used variations of this story to explain Sarah's occasional bruises to their doctor. Her withdrawn behavior at social functions, her tendency to flinch when he moved too quickly. I'll need a recent photo and any information about her habits. Places she liked to go, Blackstone says. David selects a photo from their last anniversary dinner, one where Sarah's smile doesn't quite reach her eyes, but where she looks appropriately grateful for his attention. In the image, she wears the diamond necklace he'd given her, not as a gift, but as a collar, a visible symbol of ownership that other men would recognize and respect. She has a tendency toward dramatic gestures when she's upset, David continues, building the narrative he'll need if Sarah tries to tell anyone the truth about their marriage. Last month, she threw herself down the stairs during one of her episodes. I've been trying to get her to see a specialist, but she refuses help. Each lie builds on the foundation he's been laying for years, creating a version of events where he's the long-suffering husband dealing with an unstable wife, rather than the predator who has been systematically destroying another human being. The phone rings while he's transferring money to Blackstone's account. The caller ID shows his golf partner, Judge Harrison Blackwood, probably wondering why David missed their weekly game. "Harry, thank God you called," David says, injecting just the right amount of distress into his voice. "Sarah's gone missing. She's been having some mental health issues, and I'm terrified she might do something to hurt herself." Judge Blackwood's response is immediately sympathetic. The two men have known each other for 15 years, built a friendship over shared drinks and mutual professional respect. Harry has no reason to doubt David's version of events, especially when it confirms his own biases about hysterical women and their tendency toward melodrama. "What can I do to help?" the judge asks. "I may need some legal assistance if this situation escalates. Sarah's been making some wild accusations lately, completely unfounded, but potentially damaging to my reputation if the wrong people take them seriously." David's cell phone buzzes with an incoming message, location data finally coming through. His wife's phone has been detected in Cedar Falls, 3 hours north of their home. The small town, with its working-class sensibilities and limited resources, seems like exactly the kind of place Sarah might think she could disappear. But David Collins doesn't give up what belongs to him, and Sarah belongs to him completely. Sarah finds unexpected peace in the routine of Betty's diner. Her hands have learned the weight of coffee pots and the rhythm of taking orders, simple tasks that feel revolutionary after years of David micromanaging every aspect of her existence. The work uniform, black pants and a cheerful yellow polo shirt with Betty's embroidered over the pocket, represents the first clothes she's chosen for herself in 8 years. Marcus arrives each morning at 7, settling into the same booth near the back window with his sketch pad and coffee. Sarah has begun looking forward to these quiet moments before the breakfast rush, watching his hands move across the paper with the same careful precision he uses for everything else. "What are you drawing today?" she asks, refilling his cup without being asked. Marcus tilts the pad so she can see a detailed study of her hands as they work, capturing the delicate strength in her fingers and the small scar near her thumb from a childhood accident. The drawing shows her hands holding a coffee cup, steam rising like hope made visible. "You make my hands look graceful," Sarah says softly. "I draw what I see," Marcus replies. But there's something in his voice that suggests he sees more than graceful hands. He sees capability, resilience, beauty that has survived despite everything. Later that morning, Marcus takes her to the Iron Hawk's garage, where Rosa works on a vintage Triumph motorcycle, her coveralls stained with oil and her hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. The garage smells of motor oil and metal, but also of purpose and pride in honest work. "Want to learn something useful?" Rosa asks, gesturing toward a toolbox that has seen decades of service. Sarah approaches hesitantly. David had always insisted that mechanical work was inappropriate for women, that getting her hands dirty was unladylike and beneath her station as his wife. But Rosa moves around the motorcycle with confident expertise, explaining each component with the patience of a natural teacher. Motorcycles are honest, Rosa says, as she guides Sarah's hands to feel the engine's components. They don't lie or pretend to be something they're not. When something's wrong, they tell you. When they're running right, you know it in your bones. Sarah's fingers learn the difference between the smooth metal of properly functioning parts and the roughness that indicates wear or damage. There's something meditative about the work. The way problems have clear solutions and effort produces visible results. I used to teach high school shop class before I opened this place, Rosa continues, watching Sarah's growing confidence with the tools. Girls were always afraid to try at first, convinced they'd break something or make mistakes. But once they learned that mistakes are just part of learning, they often became the best students. Marcus watches from across the garage, occasionally offering quiet guidance, but mostly letting Sarah discover her own capabilities. There's pride in his expression as she successfully removes and reinstalls a spark plug. Accomplishing something David would have insisted was impossible for her. "You're a natural," Rosa says. And Sarah feels a warmth that has nothing to do with physical temperature. That afternoon, Marcus shows her another side of himself when they visit the town library. He moves through the building with obvious familiarity, nodding to the librarian and heading directly to the art section. His sketch pad appears again, this time filled with architectural studies of the library's interior, the way afternoon light falls across reading tables, the comfortable disorder of well-used books. "I've been documenting the town," Marcus explains. Rosa says, "I'm creating a visual history, capturing moments before they change." Sarah studies the sketches with growing amazement. Each drawing reveals his artist's eye for detail and his deep appreciation for ordinary beauty. There's love in every line, affection for a community that has accepted him despite his unconventional appearance. "These should be displayed somewhere," Sarah says. "People should see how you see this place." Marcus closes the pad abruptly, uncomfortable with praise. "They're just sketches. They're more than that. They're proof that you belong here, that you understand this town better than people who've lived here their whole lives." That evening, as they walk back toward the diner, Sarah realizes something has shifted between them. The fear that initially drove her to accept his help has transformed into genuine affection and respect. Marcus has never tried to control her choices or remake her in his image. Instead, he simply created space for her to discover who she might be without David's influence. "Thank you," she says as they pause outside Betty's. "For what?" "For seeing me as someone worth saving." Marcus studies her face in the soft light from the diner's windows. "You saved yourself, Sarah. I just happened to be there when you needed a ride." The Cedar Falls Community Center buzzes with tension as Mayor Patricia Wells calls the monthly town meeting to order. Sarah sits in the back row beside Betty, watching as concerned citizens fill folding chairs that have seen decades of similar gatherings. On the wall behind the mayor hangs a framed newspaper, clipping from the Cedar Falls Gazette with the headline, "Motorcycle Club Brings Crime Concerns to Local Community." The article features a grainy photograph of the Iron Hawks clubhouse and quotes from unnamed sources about increased criminal activity and threats to family values. Sarah recognizes the careful language of prejudice dressed as legitimate concern, the same respectability politics that allow people like David to hide their true nature behind expensive suits and community standing. "We're here tonight to address the growing presence of the Iron Hawks Motorcycle Club in our community," Mayor Wells announces, her voice carrying the authority of someone who has never questioned her right to speak for others. Several citizens have expressed concerns about property values, public safety, and the example being set for our children. Harold Whitman, who owns the hardware store on Main Street, stands to speak first. His face is flushed with righteous indignation as he gestures toward the newspaper clipping. "These people are not our kind of people," he declares. "They ride through our streets making noise, intimidating decent families. My customers are afraid to shop after dark because of the motorcycles parked outside that diner." Murmurs of agreement ripple through the crowd, though Sarah notices that many of the voices belong to people who have never actually spoken to any of the Iron Hawks members. Fear of the unknown has always been easier than the effort required to understand difference. "I've seen children crossing the street to avoid walking past their motorcycles," adds Margaret Foster, the elementary school principal. "What kind of message does that send about the values we're trying to teach?" Betty shifts uncomfortably in her seat, and Sarah can see the frustration building in the older woman's expression. Finally, Betty stands, her voice cutting through the murmurs with decades of earned authority. "I've been serving food in this town for 40 years, Betty begins, "and I've seen a lot of different kinds of people come through my doors. The Iron Hawks have been nothing but respectful, helpful, and generous with their tips. Marcus Steele helped me move furniture when my back was acting up. Rosa Steele fixed my coffee machine for free when it broke during the breakfast rush. But they're criminals," Harold Whitman interrupts. "Everyone knows what motorcycle clubs are really about. What everyone knows and what's actually true are often two different things," Betty replies firmly. "I judge people by their actions, not their appearance or the assumptions printed in newspapers." Sheriff Tom Bradley, a weathered man in his 50s who has spent his career trying to balance law enforcement with community relations, stands to address the crowd. His expression suggests someone caught between political pressure and professional integrity. "I want to be clear that we've had no formal complaints filed against the Iron Hawks," Sheriff Bradley states. "No arrests, no citations, no documented incidents of criminal behavior. My officers have had several interactions with club members, all of which have been cordial and cooperative." "What about the drugs?" Mayor Wells asks pointedly. "Everyone knows motorcycle clubs are involved in drug trafficking. I deal in facts, not rumors," Sheriff Bradley replies carefully. "If anyone has specific evidence of criminal activity, I encourage them to file a formal report. Otherwise, we're talking about suspicion without substance." Sarah feels her courage building as she listens to the fear and prejudice being expressed as righteous concern. These are the same people who would have smiled at David's charming exterior while ignoring the bruises he left on her skin. They judge safety by appearance rather than character, comfort by conformity rather than kindness. She stands slowly, feeling every eye in the room turn toward her. The newspaper clipping seems to mock her from its frame, representing everything wrong with surface-level judgments and societal assumptions. "My name is Sarah Collins," she begins, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "3 weeks ago I was walking through a storm, scared and alone. A member of the Iron Hawks found me and offered help. He didn't ask questions or demand explanations. He simply saw someone who needed assistance and provided it." The room falls silent, sensing something significant in her words. "I've been working at Betty's diner since then, and I've gotten to know these people you're so afraid of. They're mechanics and veterans and small business owners. They're people who have found family in each other because they've been judged and dismissed by communities like this. But surely you can see the difference between helping one person and the larger concerns about criminal activity." Mayor Wells interjects. Sarah meets the mayor's gaze directly. "The only criminal activity I've experienced in this town came from a respected businessman in an expensive suit. Not from anyone wearing leather and riding a motorcycle." David Collins steps out of his black Mercedes in downtown Cedar Falls, adjusting his Italian silk tie and smoothing his perfectly styled hair. In his breast pocket sits a wedding photograph, him and Sarah on their wedding day, her smile radiant with the hope of young love before he taught her to fear that very expression. He carries the photo not from sentiment, but as a prop, evidence of ownership and marital devotion that supports the narrative he's constructed. The private investigator's report was thorough and disturbing. Sarah has been living among motorcycle criminals, working in a diner, associating with people who represent everything David has spent his life rising above. The thought of his wife, his property, degrading herself with such company fills him with a rage that requires all his self-control to mask. His first stop is the Cedar Falls Police Department, a modest building that reflects the town's working-class sensibilities. Sheriff Tom Bradley greets him with the professional courtesy reserved for obviously successful outsiders, though David detects a wariness in the older man's eyes. "Mr. Collins, I understand you're looking for your wife," Sheriff Bradley says. Gesturing toward a chair across from his cluttered desk, David settles himself with the practiced grace of someone accustomed to commanding rooms and conversations. He removes the wedding photograph from his pocket, placing it carefully on the sheriff's desk, where the image of Sarah's younger, happier face can work its intended effect. "Sarah's been struggling with some psychological issues," David begins, his voice carrying exactly the right mixture of concern and embarrassment. Depression, anxiety, sometimes she has episodes where she doesn't think clearly. 3 weeks ago, she had a particularly bad night and just disappeared. Sheriff Bradley studies the photograph, noting the obvious happiness in both faces. The image tells a story of successful marriage and mutual devotion that contrasts sharply with David's current distress. "Have you filed a missing person report with your local authorities?" the sheriff asks. "Of course, but they suggested she might have come here on her own." Sarah grew up in a small town, and when she's having an episode, she sometimes talks about wanting to return to that simpler way of life. David has rehearsed this story until it flows with natural conviction. Every detail supports his position as the concerned husband dealing with a mentally unstable wife, a narrative that plays perfectly into small-town sympathies and assumptions about marriage and mental health. "I'm told she may be staying at Betty's Diner," David continues, "which concerns me because she's apparently become involved with some motorcycle club members. In her current state of mind, she's vulnerable to manipulation by people who might take advantage of her condition." Sheriff Bradley's expression shifts slightly. The Iron Hawks have been a topic of community discussion lately, and David's concerns align perfectly with the fears that have already been voiced by other citizens. The Iron Hawks aren't criminals, Mr. Collins, but I understand your concern about your wife's well-being. A woman in a fragile mental state could certainly be influenced by people she perceives as protective. Exactly, David agrees, allowing relief to color his voice. Sarah has always been drawn to wounded birds and lost causes. In her current condition, she might see these people as misunderstood rather than dangerous. The photograph sits between them like evidence, Sarah's wedding day smile seeming to validate every word David speaks. He has learned over the years that people want to believe in love stories, in marriages that work, in men who care enough about their wives to search across state lines for them. "What would you like me to do?" Sheriff Bradley asks. "I just want to talk to her, convince her to come home and get the help she needs. But I'm afraid if I approach her directly, she might run again. Could you perhaps speak with her first? Let her know I'm here and that I'm not angry, just worried." David's request sounds perfectly reasonable, the kind of intervention that law enforcement might facilitate in any number of domestic situations. Sheriff Bradley nods slowly, already formulating an approach that will protect everyone's interests while hopefully reuniting a troubled woman with her concerned husband. "I'll go talk to her this afternoon," the sheriff agrees. "See if I can get a sense of her state of mind and whether she's willing to speak with you." "Thank you," David says, standing and carefully returning the photograph to his pocket. "I know this is irregular, but I love my wife, and I just want her to be safe and healthy." As he leaves the police station, David allows himself a small smile of satisfaction. The seeds have been planted, the narrative established. Now it's simply a matter of waiting for small-town decency and law enforcement cooperation to deliver Sarah back into his hands. The wedding photograph presses against his chest as he walks, a reminder of ownership that will soon be enforced once again. Marcus feels the familiar weight of his combat knife against his ribs. secured in the custom sheath Rosa made for him when he came back from Afghanistan. The blade isn't meant for show or intimidation. It's a tool that has saved his life more times than he cares to count. And now it serves as a reminder that some threats require more than words to address. Sarah's face has gone pale as winter ice when Sheriff Bradley appears in Betty's doorway, his expression carrying the careful neutrality of a lawman trying to balance competing interests. Marcus recognizes the look from his military days, the face men wear when they're about to deliver news that will change everything. Sarah Collins. Sheriff Bradley asks, though his tone suggests he already knows the answer. Yes, Sarah whispers, her hands trembling as she sets down the coffee pot she'd been holding. Your husband is in town. He's very worried about you, says you've been having some difficulties, and he just wants to make sure you're safe. The words hit Sarah like physical blows. David has found her, has already begun spinning his web of manipulation and lies. She can imagine exactly how he presented himself to the sheriff, the concerned husband, the respectable businessman, the man whose only crime is loving his wife too much. I'm not going back, Sarah says, her voice barely audible. Sheriff Bradley's expression softens with what he clearly believes is understanding. Ma'am, I'm not here to force anyone to do anything. But your husband showed me your wedding photo, and it's clear you two had something special. Maybe whatever problems you're having could be worked out with some professional help. Marcus steps forward, placing himself between Sarah and the sheriff. The movement is subtle but deliberate, the positioning of someone who has learned to read threats and respond accordingly. She said she's not going back. Marcus states quietly. And you are? Sheriff Bradley asks, his tone shifting slightly as he takes in Marcus's leather vest and the Iron Hawk's patch. A friend, someone who believes women have the right to make their own choices. The sheriff's hand moves unconsciously toward his service weapon, a gesture so slight that most people would miss it. But Marcus catches it, recognizes the fear and prejudice that drives such reactions. In the sheriff's eyes, Marcus represents everything dangerous and unpredictable about the people who live outside society's approved boundaries. Mr. Collins mentioned his wife might be influenced by people she perceives as protective, Sheriff Bradley says carefully. In her current mental state, she might not be thinking clearly about what's best for her. Her current mental state? Marcus's voice carries an edge that makes Betty look up from her position behind the counter. Her husband explained that she's been having some psychological difficulties. Depression, anxiety, episodes where her judgment isn't reliable. Sarah's breathing becomes shallow and rapid. She's heard these words before. David's careful construction of her as mentally unstable, unable to make rational decisions, in need of his guidance and control. It's the perfect trap. Any protest she makes can be dismissed as evidence of her instability. That's not true, Sarah manages to say. Sheriff Bradley's expression carries the patronizing sympathy reserved for people who can't see their own problems. Mrs. Collins, your husband loves you very much. He's driven 3 hours just to make sure you're okay. Maybe you could at least talk to him. Marcus's hand moves slightly toward his ribs, where the combat knife rests against his skin. Not a threat, not yet, but a reminder to himself that he has options if words fail. He's seen what men like David Collins do to women like Sarah, has witnessed the aftermath of domestic violence during his tours overseas, where such brutality often masqueraded as cultural tradition. She doesn't want to see him, Marcus says firmly. With respect. Sir, that's between husband and wife. I'm not sure it's appropriate for outsiders to interfere in a marriage. The words hang in the air like smoke from a fired gun. Marcus understands the subtext perfectly. He's the outsider, the dangerous biker who doesn't belong in conversations about respectable marriages and family concerns. Sheriff Bradley sees David Collins as a peer, someone whose word carries weight and credibility. Betty, Marcus calls without taking his eyes off the sheriff. Would you mind calling Jake? Tell him we might need some backup. The sheriff's posture stiffens. Are you threatening a law enforcement officer? I'm protecting someone who asked for protection. If that threatens you, maybe you should ask yourself why. Sarah finds her voice strengthened by Marcus's unwavering support. Sheriff Bradley, my husband beat me for 8 years. I've scars and medical records to prove it. I'm not mentally ill, I'm a survivor. The room falls silent except for the soft hum of the coffee machine and the distant sound of motorcycles pulling into the parking lot. The diary's pages flutter in Marcus's hands like wounded birds, each entry a testament to years of systematic abuse that Sarah had documented in secret. She'd hidden the small, leather-bound journal inside a hollowed-out cookbook, recording dates, injuries, and David's escalating violence with the desperate hope that someday the truth might matter to someone. August 15th. David angry about dinner being 5 minutes late. Bruised ribs, told doctor I fell downstairs. Marcus reads aloud, his voice tight with controlled fury. September 3rd. Black eye from forgetting to record check number. Wore sunglasses to grocery store. Mrs. Henderson asked if I was okay. Lied and said I had allergies. Sarah sits across from him in the Iron Hawks clubhouse, surrounded by the protective presence of her chosen family. Jake paces behind the bar like a caged animal, his massive hands clenched into fists. Rosa cleans the same motorcycle part for the 3rd time, her jaw set with the kind of anger that burns cold and steady. The diary contains 3 years of entries, each one more heartbreaking than the last. Sarah's handwriting changes over time, becoming smaller, more careful, as if she was learning to take up less space even on paper. Some entries are stained with what might be tears, or might be something worse. November 20th, David says I'm getting fat. No dinner for 3 days. Dizzy at work but can't let anyone know. If they ask, I'm on a new diet. Marcus continues, each word hitting the room like a physical blow. Why didn't you show this to someone earlier? Jake asks, though his tone carries understanding rather than judgment. Sarah's voice is barely above a whisper. Who would have believed me? David is charming, successful, respected. I'm just his wife, and he made sure I knew what would happen if I tried to tell anyone. The diary reveals the calculated nature of David's abuse, how he isolated her from friends and family, controlled their finances, monitored her every movement. Each entry shows a woman systematically stripped of agency, identity, and hope. December 10th. David broke my phone for texting my sister. Says family is trying to turn me against him. Maybe he's right. I can't tell any more. Rosa reads from another page, her voice thick with emotion. Marcus finds the final entry, dated just 2 days before Sarah fled. His hands shake slightly as he reads her desperate words. I think he's going to kill me. Not in anger this time, but cold and planned. He's been researching life insurance policies and asking casual questions about my will. I have to run. If something happens to me, this diary is proof that David Collins is a monster. The room falls silent, except for the sound of Jake's boots on the concrete floor and the distant rumble of motorcycles as other club members arrive. Word has spread quickly through their network. Sarah needs protection, and the Iron Hawks take care of their own. Tommy Wrench Martinez enters with his wife Maria, followed by several other members who have interrupted their evening plans to stand with their brother and the woman he's claimed as family. These are people who understand what it means to be judged by appearances, who know that real danger often wears a respectable face. We need to get this to someone who will listen, Rosa says, gesturing toward the diary. Sheriff Bradley. Won't want to hear it, Jake replies grimly. He's already bought into the concerned husband story. In his mind, we're the dangerous ones. Marcus closes the diary carefully, treating it with the reverence due to evidence that might save Sarah's life. Detective Santos in the county sheriff's office. She handled a domestic violence case for one of my army buddies. She might be willing to look at this with fresh eyes. Sarah nods slowly, understanding that revealing her diary means exposing her shame to strangers, opening her most private pain to official scrutiny. But she also recognizes that silence has protected David while endangering her. There's something else, Sarah says quietly, reaching into her purse. She produces a small digital recorder, the kind used for taking notes or recording meetings. I started recording our fights in the last few months. I thought if something happened to me, maybe someone would find it and know the truth. The recorder sits in her palm, like a grenade, holding the power to destroy David's carefully constructed narrative. Marcus understands the courage it took to document her own abuse, to preserve evidence while living in constant fear of discovery. "You're braver than you know," Marcus tells her, his voice soft with admiration. "I didn't feel brave. I felt terrified every single day. Courage isn't the absence of fear," Jake says from behind the bar. "It's doing what's right despite being scared. You documented the truth when you could have just endured in silence." "That's the bravest thing I've ever heard." The police report sits on Judge Harrison Blackwood's mahogany desk like a loaded weapon. Its official letterhead lending credibility to what Marcus knows are carefully crafted lies. Detective Maria Santos slides the document toward him with the frustrated expression of someone who has spent her career fighting a system designed to protect men like David Collins. "Domestic disturbance. Filed this morning," Detective Santos explains, her voice tight with professional restraint. "According to this report, Sarah Collins has been kidnapped by members of a criminal motorcycle organization and is being held against her will." Marcus scans the document, noting David's signature at the bottom and the way every paragraph reinforces the narrative of Sarah as victim rather than survivor. The report describes her as mentally unstable and easily manipulated, painting the Iron Hawks as predators who have taken advantage of a vulnerable woman. "This is complete fabrication," Marcus says, his military training helping him maintain composure despite the fury building in his chest. "I know that, and you know that, but Judge Blackwood has already signed a temporary restraining order based on this report," Detective Santos replies, sliding another document across the desk. "You're required to stay at least 500 feet away from Sarah Collins, and any member of the Iron Hawks found in her vicinity can be arrested for violation of a protective order." The legal maneuvering is brilliant in its simplicity. David has used the system's built-in biases to weaponize law enforcement against the very people trying to protect his wife. The restraining order transforms Marcus from protector to legal threat, making it a crime for him to offer the support that Sarah desperately needs. "What about Sarah's diary? The recordings?" Marcus asks. Detective Santos's expression grows even grimmer. "Inadmissible without proper chain of custody. And even if we could use them, David's lawyers would argue they were obtained under duress or fabricated by people with criminal intent." Marcus studies the police report more carefully, noting the subtle language that portrays David as a concerned husband, dealing with extraordinary circumstances. Every paragraph reinforces his respectability while questioning Sarah's mental capacity and the Iron Hawk's motives. Judge Blackwood is David's golf partner, Detective Santos continues. They've known each other for 15 years. When a respected businessman comes forward with concerns about his mentally ill wife being manipulated by a motorcycle gang, the judge sees a clear case of protecting the vulnerable. The irony is bitter and complete. The same legal system that should protect Sarah from her abuser has been turned against her, making it impossible for her actual protectors to help without facing arrest. David's understanding of power structures and social dynamics has given him the perfect weapon. "So what are our options?" Marcus asks. "Legally, very limited. The restraining order gives David the moral and legal high ground. If you or any Iron Hawks member is found near Sarah, it validates every claim in this report. You become the dangerous criminals, keeping a sick woman from getting the help she needs." Marcus's hands clench into fists as he considers the trap David has constructed. It's a masterpiece of manipulation, using society's prejudices and the legal system's assumptions to isolate Sarah from the people willing to protect her. What about Sarah's rights? Her choice in the matter? That's the beautiful part of David's strategy, Detective Santos says with bitter admiration. He's questioning her competency to make rational decisions. If she chooses to stay with the motorcycle club over returning to her loving husband, that just proves she's not thinking clearly. The police report includes statements from concerned citizens who witnessed Sarah's erratic behavior and association with known criminals. Marcus recognizes the language from the town meeting. The same fears and prejudices, now given official weight in a legal document. There is one possibility, Detective Santos says quietly, glancing toward the door to ensure they're not being overheard. If Sarah were willing to file counter-charges, if she had solid evidence of domestic abuse that couldn't be dismissed as fabrication or mental illness. She has both. Medical records, photographs, witness statements. From when? How recent? Marcus realizes the problem immediately. Sarah's most recent injuries have healed, and David has been careful to avoid documented violence since her disappearance. Her historical evidence can be dismissed as old news, irrelevant to current circumstances. He's good at this, Marcus admits. He's had years of practice. Men like David Collins don't become expert manipulators overnight. They refine their techniques over time, learning to use every system and institution to maintain control. The police report sits between them like evidence of a perfect crime, one where the victim becomes the perpetrator and the abuser becomes the hero. Marcus understands now why so many women never leave, why the system that should protect them often becomes another weapon in their abuser's arsenal. Betty's diner guest book lies open on the counter like a testament to the lives the Iron Hawks have touched over the years. The worn leather binding holds hundreds of entries dating back 3 decades, each page filled with handwritten stories that contradict every stereotype about motorcycle clubs and the people who belong to them. Sarah runs her fingers over the yellowed pages, reading entries that reveal a different truth than the one being spread through Cedar Falls. March 1995, the Iron Hawks helped search for my missing daughter when the police gave up, found her safe and brought her home. Forever grateful. Janet Morrison. The entry is followed by a child's drawing of motorcycles and the words, "Thank you for finding me," in crayon. Betty stands beside her, turning pages with the reverence of someone sharing sacred stories. That was before Jake became club president, Betty explains. His predecessor, old Sam Watkins, organized the search when 8-year-old Amy Morrison wandered off during a camping trip. 60 club members from 3 counties spent 4 days combing the woods until they found her. Another entry catches Sarah's attention. June 2010. When the tornado destroyed our farm, the Iron Hawks were the first to show up with chainsaws and work gloves. They cleared debris for 3 days without being asked and wouldn't accept payment. Real angels wear leather jackets. The Patterson family, page after page, tells similar stories. Tommy Martinez rebuilding a widow's porch after her husband's death. Rosa Steele teaching automotive skills to single mothers so they couldn't be cheated by dishonest mechanics. Marcus organizing supply drives for veterans shelters using his military connections and the club's fundraising abilities. Why don't people know about this? Sarah asks, her voice thick with emotion. Because good news doesn't sell newspapers, Betty replies. And because people prefer their heroes to look like heroes and their villains to look like villains. It makes the world feel safer and more predictable. The front door chimes as Dr. Patricia Wong enters, her medical bag in hand and concern etched on her face. She's followed by Ellen Rodriguez from the grocery store, then by Mike Stevens, who runs the auto repair shop on 2nd Street. Word has spread through certain circles about David Collins and his version of events, but these are people who judge by actions rather than appearances. Is it true about the restraining order? Dr. Wong asks, settling into a booth where she can see Sarah clearly. Sarah nods, feeling the weight of legal persecution settling over her like a suffocating blanket. My husband convinced a judge that I'm mentally unstable and being manipulated by criminals. That's the biggest load of garbage I've ever heard, Ellen Rodriguez declares, her usually quiet voice sharp with indignation. I've watched you work in this diner for 3 weeks. You're polite, hardworking, and the sanest person I've met in years. Mike Stevens nods agreement. My nephew was acting up at school, getting into fights, heading down a bad path. Marcus Steele spent 2 months teaching him motorcycle maintenance, gave him something positive to focus on. Turned that boy around completely. Dr. Wong opens her medical bag and removes a thick file folder. I've been treating Ironhawks members for 5 years. Routine checkups, work injuries, nothing unusual. They're some of the most responsible patients I have. Always keep appointments, follow medical advice, pay their bills on time. The guest book continues to reveal its secrets as Betty turns more pages. Her teacher thanking Rosa for guest speaking about women in traditionally male occupations. An elderly man whose car broke down on a winter night, rescued by club members who not only fixed his vehicle but followed him home to ensure his safety. December 2018. The Iron Hawk saved my life, Sarah reads aloud. I was contemplating suicide after my husband's death, sitting on the bridge at Miller's Crossing. Marcus Steele talked me down, stayed with me for 6 hours until my daughter could drive up from Springfield. He visits every month to check on me. Angels don't always have wings. Dorothy Maxwell. Dorothy works at the flower shop now, Betty says softly. She's become one of my regular customers, always talks about how Marcus gave her a reason to keep living. Sheriff Bradley appears in the doorway, his expression conflicted as he takes in the gathered crowd. Sarah can see the weight of community pressure in his posture, the tension between his professional obligations and his growing understanding of the situation. Mrs. Collins, I need to inform you that your husband has requested a welfare check. He's concerned about your mental state and wants to ensure you're not being coerced or manipulated. Dr. Wong stands immediately. Sheriff, as Sarah's physician, I can attest to her mental competency. She's shown no signs of psychological distress beyond what would be expected from someone fleeing domestic violence. You're her physician. Sheriff Bradley asks, surprise evident in his voice. As of this morning, I've conducted a thorough evaluation at her request. My professional opinion is that Sarah Collins is mentally sound, making rational decisions, and in immediate danger if forced to return to her abusive husband. Detective Maria Santos spreads the hospital records across her desk like cards in a deadly game of solitaire. The medical files date back 7 years and paint a horrifying picture of systematic violence disguised as accidents and clumsiness. But it's the death certificate that makes her hands tremble with barely controlled rage. Jennifer Ann Collins, age 29, cause of death, accidental fall downstairs resulting in fatal head trauma. David Collins's first wife. Detective Santos explains to the assembled group in her cramped office. Sarah sits between Marcus and Rosa, her face pale, as she absorbs the implications of what they're learning. Betty holds Sarah's hand with the protective grip of a mother defending her child. The hospital records reveal a pattern that spans Jennifer's 3-year marriage to David. Emergency room visits for broken bones, always with explanations that sound plausible in isolation, but form a damning pattern when viewed together. Patient states she fell while carrying laundry downstairs. Patient reports slipping in the shower, resulting in fractured ribs. Patient claims she walked into a door in the dark, causing facial contusions. The attending physician noted suspicious injuries, but Jennifer Collins insisted they were accidents. Detective Santos continues, pointing to handwritten notes in the margins of several reports. Dr. Elizabeth Harper documented her concerns about potential domestic violence, but was unable to get Jennifer to admit to abuse. Sarah recognizes herself in every report, remembers the same lies she told to explain David's violence. The pattern is identical, the careful targeting of areas that could be concealed by clothing, the plausible explanations, the victim's protection of her abuser through denial and fabrication. How did she die? Sarah asks, though she's not sure she wants to know the answer. Officially. She fell down the stairs while David was away on a business trip. Neighbors heard the commotion, found her body at the bottom of the staircase. David returned home to find his wife dead from what appeared to be a tragic accident. But the medical examiner's private notes buried in the file and never made public tell a different story. The pattern of injuries suggested Jennifer had been beaten before her fall. The angle of impact was inconsistent with a simple tumble downstairs. Most damning of all, traces of a sedative were found in her blood, not enough to be fatal, but sufficient to impair her coordination and judgment. Why wasn't this investigated as murder? Rosa demands. Because David Collins was a respected businessman with an airtight alibi. He was in Chicago at a conference when his wife died, had dozens of witnesses who could verify his whereabouts. The medical examiner's suspicions weren't enough to overcome the physical evidence of David's absence. Marcus studies crime scene. Photographs that show Jennifer's body at the bottom of an elegant staircase, her neck bent at an unnatural angle. Something about the scene bothers him, triggers instincts honed by years of investigating insurgent attacks in Afghanistan. The bruising on her arms, Marcus observes. Those are defensive wounds. Someone grabbed her hard before she fell. Detective Santos nods grimly. Dr. Harper noted the same thing. But without a suspect present at the time of death, the case was closed as accidental. Sarah's voice is barely audible when she speaks. He told me about Jennifer once, during one of our fights. Said she was clumsy, always falling down stairs. He said if I wasn't more careful, I might end up just like her. The room falls silent as the implications sink in. David hadn't just killed his first wife. He'd used her death as a threat against his second. A promise of what would happen if Sarah ever tried to leave or expose him. There's more. Detective Santos continues, opening another file. David Collins collected a substantial life insurance payout after Jennifer's death. $500,000, paid out without question because there was no evidence of foul play. The financial motive adds another layer to the crime, transforming Jennifer's death from passionate violence to calculated murder. David had systematically abused his wife, then arranged her death to appear accidental while ensuring he would profit from her demise. He's done this before, Sarah whispers, the full horror of her situation becoming clear. I'm not his first victim. I'm just the one who got away. Detective Santos closes the files with the careful precision of someone handling explosive materials. These records change everything. David Collins isn't just an abusive husband, he's a killer who has perfected his methods over time. And right now, he has the legal system protecting him while he hunts down the only witness who can expose him. The evidence sits before them like a roadmap to justice, but also like a death sentence hanging over Sarah's head. She's no longer just fleeing domestic violence, she's running from a murderer who has already killed once and won't hesitate to do it again. Marcus removes the Purple Heart from its worn wooden box with hands that no longer tremble from nightmares, but from the weight of truth. Finally being revealed, the medal sits heavy in his palm, its bronze surface reflecting 3 decades of secrets kept and sacrifices honored in silence. Sarah watches as he pins the decoration to his leather vest for the first time since returning from Afghanistan, transforming himself from suspected criminal to recognized hero. I never wanted to be defined by what I did overseas, Marcus explains quietly, his voice carrying the weariness of someone who has carried too much alone for too long. But sometimes you have to let people see who you really are, even when it hurts. The Ironhawks clubhouse has become a war room, filled with people whose appearances mask their true capabilities. Detective Santos spreads county maps across the poker table, while Jake coordinates with contacts in law enforcement agencies that actually listen to evidence rather than assumptions. Rosa checks and rechecks the security cameras she's installed around the building, her mechanical expertise now serving a darker purpose. David's filed for an emergency hearing. Detective Santos reports, sliding legal documents across the table. He wants Sarah declared mentally incompetent and himself appointed as her legal guardian. If he succeeds, he can have her committed to a psychiatric facility against her will. Sarah's blood runs cold as she reads the petition, recognizing David's methodical approach to destroying her credibility. Every paragraph reinforces the narrative of mental illness, citing her erratic behavior, her association with criminal elements, and her inability to make rational decisions about her own welfare. "How long do we have?" Marcus asks. "The hearing is tomorrow at 10 a.m. Judge Blackwood is presiding, which means David's already won, unless we can present evidence so compelling that even his golf buddy can't ignore it." Marcus touches the purple heart on his chest, feeling the weight of recognition he's never sought, but now needs desperately. The medal represents more than military service. It's proof that sometimes the most unlikely people are capable of extraordinary heroism. "I got this in Kandahar," Marcus begins, his voice steady despite the painful memories. "Our convoy hit an IED, 3 vehicles destroyed, 7 men trapped in the wreckage. I pulled 4 of them out before the ammunition started cooking off. Lost 2 anyway, but saved the others." The room falls silent as Marcus continues. "When I came home, I couldn't sleep, couldn't function. The VA doctors said I had PTSD, gave me pills that made everything worse. I was drinking too much, fighting too much, heading for a bad end, until Jake and the Iron Hawks gave me a family that understood what it meant to carry invisible scars." Sarah reaches for his hand, understanding now why he recognized her trauma so immediately. They are both survivors, both people who have learned to live with damage while still choosing to protect others. "The psychiatrist who evaluated me when I joined the club wrote a report," Marcus continues. "Said I showed signs of hypervigilance and protective instincts that were natural responses to combat trauma. He also said I had an unusual capacity for recognizing and responding to threats against vulnerable people." Detective Santos looks up from the legal documents. "Where is that report now?" "In my VA file. Dr. Michael Harrison, he's retired but still licensed. He might be willing to testify about trauma recognition and the protective behaviors that develop in combat veterans." Rosa adds her voice to the growing plan. "I have contacts at the VA hospital. People who know Marcus's real story, who can speak to his character and his history of helping other veterans. The Purple Heart gleams on Marcus's vest like a badge of authority that even Judge Blackwood will have to acknowledge." Sarah understands that Marcus is risking his carefully maintained privacy to save her, exposing his own pain to validate hers. "There's something else," Sarah says quietly, reaching into her purse. "I have Jennifer's diary." The room goes silent. Detective Santos looks up sharply. "What do you mean?" "I broke into David's house before I left. I was looking for money, anything that might help me start over. I found Jennifer's journal hidden in his study, locked in the same safe where he kept our important papers." Sarah produces a small leather diary, identical to her own. Its pages filled with another woman's desperate documentation of the same systematic abuse Sarah had endured. But Jennifer's final entries revealed David's escalating threats, his specific plans for her accident, and her growing certainty that he intended to kill her. "He's been researching insurance policies and asking about my will." Sarah reads from Jennifer's final entry. "I think he's going to push me down the stairs and make it look like an accident. If something happens to me, David Collins murdered me." The diary sits on the table like a voice from the grave, Jennifer's own words providing the evidence that Detective Santos needs to reopen her case and expose David as the killer he truly is. Sarah's voice recording device sits in the center of Judge Blackwood's mahogany table like a small black witness, its digital memory containing the truth that will either save her life or seal her fate. The courtroom is packed beyond capacity, with Iron Hawks members filling the back rows, while David's supporters, fellow businessmen and country club associates, occupy the front benches in their expensive suits. Judge Blackwood adjusts his glasses as he reviews the emergency petition, his expression reflecting years of friendship with David Collins and comfortable assumptions about the nature of marriage, mental illness, and social order. David sits at the plaintiff's table with his attorney, projecting the perfect image of a concerned husband seeking help for his troubled wife. "Your Honor," David's lawyer begins, "we have clear evidence that Mrs. Collins is suffering from severe psychological disturbance that renders her unable to make rational decisions about her own welfare. She has abandoned her home, her husband, and her responsibilities to live among criminal elements who are clearly manipulating her vulnerable mental state." Sarah watches from the defendant's table, flanked by Detective Santos and a court-appointed attorney who specializes in domestic violence cases. The Purple Heart on Marcus's chest catches courthouse lighting from the gallery, a visible reminder that heroes don't always look like society expects them to. Furthermore, David's attorney continues, "Mrs. Collins has been making wild accusations against her husband, claiming years of abuse that medical records do not support. These false memories and paranoid delusions are classic symptoms of the psychological break we're trying to address through proper medical intervention." Judge Blackwood nods sympathetically, clearly prepared to grant David's petition until Detective Santos stands to address the court. "Your Honor, we have new evidence that fundamentally changes the nature of this case," Detective Santos announces, her voice cutting through the courtroom's murmur. "Evidence that David Collins is not a concerned husband but a dangerous predator with a history of domestic violence that culminated in the murder of his first wife." The courtroom erupts as David's supporters register shock and the Iron Hawks. Members lean forward with grim satisfaction. Judge Blackwood bangs his gavel repeatedly, struggling to maintain order as the implications of Detective Santos's statement sink in. "That's an outrageous accusation," David's attorney objects. "My client's first wife died in a tragic accident 7 years ago. He was in another state when the incident occurred. I'd like to play a recording that was made by Mrs. Collins during one of her conversations with her husband," Detective Santos continues, gesturing toward the small device on the table. Sarah's hands shake as Detective Santos activates the recorder. Her own voice fills the courtroom, frightened and pleading, followed by David's cold, calculated responses that strip away every pretense of loving concern. "Please, David, I'll do better. I'll be more careful about dinner, about keeping the house clean," Sarah's recorded voice begs. "You said that last time." "Before I had to teach you another lesson," David's voice responds, devoid of any warmth or affection. "Just like Jennifer said before her accident. She was clumsy too, always falling downstairs." The courtroom falls silent as David's recorded voice continues, each word destroying the careful image he's built over years of manipulation. "Jennifer learned what happens when wives don't appreciate what they have. She took a very bad fall, broke her neck. Tragic accident, really. The insurance company paid out without any questions because I was such a grieving widower." Judge Blackwood's face goes ashen as the recording plays on, capturing David's explicit threats against Sarah and his casual admission of murdering his first wife. The businessman's mask slips completely as his own words convict him of crimes that go far beyond domestic violence. "I've been patient with you, Sarah, but my patience has limits. Jennifer thought she could leave me too. You can ask her how that worked out, but she's not talking anymore." The recording continues for several more minutes, each exchange more damning than the last. David's voice reveals a man who views wives as property to be controlled and disposed of when they become inconvenient. When the recording finally ends, the courtroom remains silent except for the soft sound of several people crying. David Collins sits frozen at his table, his expensive suit unable to disguise the monster that has been exposed. His attorney whispers urgently in his ear, but there is no legal strategy that can overcome a confession recorded in the perpetrator's own voice. "Mr. Collins," Judge Blackwood says slowly, his voice heavy with the weight of friendship betrayed and assumptions shattered, "you're under arrest for the murder of Jennifer Collins and conspiracy to commit murder against Sarah Collins." As sheriff's deputies move to restrain him, David's composure finally breaks. The charming businessman disappears, replaced by a snarling predator who has been cornered and exposed for what he truly is. The new motorcycle helmet sits on Betty's counter like a symbol of transformation, its glossy black surface reflecting Sarah's face as she approaches her future with cautious hope. Marcus had it custom fitted at Rosa's shop, ensuring perfect safety while honoring Sarah's choice to embrace a life she could never have imagined 6 months ago. "It's beautiful," Sarah says, running her fingers over the smooth surface that bears no resemblance to the restrictive world David had built around her. "It's freedom," Marcus replies simply, watching as she lifts the helmet and studies her reflection in its visor. The courtroom revelations have transformed Cedar Falls in ways both subtle and profound. David Collins sits in county jail awaiting trial for murder, his business empire crumbling as investigators uncover years of financial manipulation and corporate fraud that funded his carefully constructed facade. The respected businessman who had charmed his way through social circles has been revealed as a predator who used wealth and influence to hide unspeakable crimes. Judge Blackwood submitted his resignation the morning after the hearing, unable to continue serving after his friendship with David compromised his judgment so completely. Sheriff Bradley has implemented new training protocols for domestic violence cases, recognizing how easily his department was manipulated by someone who understood exactly which prejudices to exploit. The Iron Hawks have been transformed from community menace to local heroes, their true character finally visible to neighbors who had judged them by appearance rather than action. The newspaper that once portrayed them as criminals now features stories about their veteran support programs, their charity rides for children's hospitals, and their role in exposing a killer who had hidden among the community's most respected citizens. Sarah adjusts the helmet's fit, marveling at how something designed for protection can feel so much like liberation. For 8 years, David had controlled every aspect of her appearance, her movement, her choices. Now she's about to climb onto a motorcycle and ride wherever the road might take her. "Are you scared?" Marcus asks, understanding that Sarah is confronting more than just the mechanics of motorcycle operation. "Terrified," Sarah admits, "but it's a different kind of fear. It's the fear of possibility instead of the fear of punishment." Rosa emerges from the garage, wiping her hands on a shop rag and grinning at the sight of Sarah holding her new helmet. The past months have forged an unlikely sisterhood between the two women, built on mutual respect and shared understanding of what it means to be underestimated by people who judge women by conventional expectations. "Ready for your first real ride?" Rosa asks. Sarah nods, though her hands tremble slightly as she places the helmet on her head. The fit is perfect, comfortable without being confining, protective without being restrictive. Through the visor, the world takes on a slightly different quality, as if she's seeing possibilities that were invisible before. Marcus's Harley sits waiting in the parking lot, its chrome gleaming in afternoon sunlight that feels warmer than it has in years. Sarah approaches the motorcycle with steps that grow more confident as she recognizes that this machine represents choice rather than danger, a partnership rather than control. The key is trust, Marcus explains, as Sarah settles onto the passenger seat behind him. "Trust the bike, trust me, trust yourself. When we take corners, lean with me, not away from me. When we accelerate, let yourself move with the motion instead of fighting it." Sarah wraps her arms around Marcus's solid frame, feeling the steady beat of his heart through his leather jacket. This embrace is voluntary, chosen, given freely rather than demanded or taken by force. The difference transforms the simple act of holding on into something profound. The engine rumbles to life beneath them, its power controlled and purposeful rather than threatening. Sarah feels the vibration through her entire body as Marcus guides them slowly out of the parking lot and onto the open road that leads beyond Cedar Falls toward whatever future they choose to build together. as they ride through neighborhoods where people wave instead of stare, past businesses where owners emerge to offer friendly greetings. Sarah realizes that she has found more than safety or love. She has discovered a community that values authenticity over appearance, character over status, loyalty over convenience. The wind rushes past her helmet as they gain speed, carrying away the last remnants of the fear and shame that David had built around her like prison walls. For the first time in 8 years, Sarah Collins is exactly where she chooses to be, with people who accept her completely, riding toward a horizon that holds infinite possibility. The motorcycle carries them forward into a future that belongs entirely to them, leaving behind the wreckage of lies and violence that once seemed inescapable. The simple gold bands rest in Marcus's calloused palm like promises made tangible, their modest elegance speaking to choices freely made rather than obligations imposed. Unlike the expensive diamond set that David had used to mark his ownership, these rings represent equality, partnership, and love that grows from respect rather than control. 6 months have passed since David's conviction and sentencing to life in prison without parole. The trial revealed the full scope of his crimes, not just Jennifer's murder and the systematic abuse of Sarah, but financial fraud that had destroyed several small businesses and left dozens of families struggling to rebuild their lives. The charming businessman had been a predator in every aspect of his existence. Betty's diner has been transformed into a wedding chapel for the afternoon, its familiar booths and checkered floor decorated with wildflowers that Rosa and the other Iron Hawks women gathered from the fields beyond town. The guest list includes everyone who matters. The chosen family that formed around Sarah during her darkest hours and became the foundation for her brightest future. Sarah wears a simple white dress that she selected herself. Its flowing lines flattering without being restrictive, beautiful without being ostentatious. Her hair moves freely in the gentle breeze from the open windows, no longer controlled by David's rigid expectations of how a proper wife should appear. The bruises have faded completely, replaced by the healthy glow of someone who sleeps peacefully and wakes without fear. Marcus stands before her in his best black jeans and a crisp white shirt, the Purple Heart pinned to his chest, not as a display of military honor, but as a reminder that heroism comes in many forms. His hands are steady as he takes the rings from his palm, meeting Sarah's eyes with the calm certainty of someone who has found his place in the world. Do you, Marcus Steele, take Sarah Collins to be your wife, to stand with her as an equal partner in whatever adventures life brings? Betty asks, having obtained online ordination specifically for this ceremony. I do, Marcus replies, his voice carrying the weight of promises he intends to keep. I promise to support your choices, celebrate your strength, and never try to change the woman I fell in love with. Sarah's eyes fill with happy tears as she accepts the ring that represents security without imprisonment, commitment without control. The simple band slides onto her finger with perfect fit, as if it was always meant to be there. Do you, Sarah Collins, take Marcus Steele to be your husband, to stand with him as an equal partner in building the life you both deserve? I do, Sarah says, her voice strong and clear. I promise to trust your heart, support your dreams, and love you exactly as you are. The Iron Hawks erupt in cheers as the couple kisses, their celebration filling the diner with the kind of joy that comes from witnessing love triumph over fear. Jake whistles loudly while Rosa wipes tears from her eyes. Betty beams with maternal pride as she watches two damaged souls complete each other's healing. Detective Santos raises her coffee cup in a toast. To Sarah and Marcus, proof that the best families are the ones we choose, and that love is strongest when it's built on respect and trust. The celebration continues as the afternoon fades into evening, filled with stories shared and future plans discussed. Sarah and Marcus will split their time between the diner and the Iron Hawks garage, both contributing their skills to the community that embraced them. Sarah has enrolled in business classes to help Betty expand the diner's operations, While Marcus has been commissioned to create a series of drawings documenting the town's history. As the last guests prepare to leave, Sarah and Marcus stand together on the diner's front steps, watching motorcycles roar to life in the parking lot. The sound that once terrified her now represents family, freedom, and the chosen life she never dared to imagine. "Any regrets?" Marcus asks, adjusting the simple wedding band on his finger. Sarah considers the question seriously, thinking of the path that led her from David's mansion to this modest diner. From expensive jewelry that felt like chains to simple rings that feel like wings. "Only that it took me so long to find the courage to run," she replies. "And that Jennifer never got the chance to discover what we found," Marcus nods, understanding that their happiness carries the responsibility to honor the woman whose death helped expose David's true nature. They will live fully not just for themselves, but for the future that Jennifer was denied. The motorcycle carries them home through streets where they belong, surrounded by people who chose to see past appearances to the truth beneath. Their story has become legend in Cedar Falls, proof that love can triumph over fear, that families are built through loyalty rather than blood, and that sometimes the people who look most dangerous are actually the safest harbor in any storm.